Welcome to the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast, episode number 77. And this episode, as part of our ISO 45001 series, we're going to talk about the planning aspects. This is a shorter podcast, just covering this section only. Doesn't mean that it's not really important to sit down and focus on, but let's just dive right into it then. So, for anybody who hasn't been on the series, you're just kind of chiming in for the first time, ISO 45001 is a occupational health and safety management system, and it provides the framework for organizations to identify, control, and minimize risks related to health and safety in the workplace. And it follows the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, much like I do in life. And if you think about the ISO 9001, ISO 14001, they're all very similar, yet not quite the same, but they all follow that Plan, Do, Check, Act. So let's sit down and talk about planning then. There's a there's an old phrase in the Army that says, "You never plan to fail, you fail to plan." So while I know that there's a lot of sections I've already said, it's pretty critical that we sit down and we look at this. The planning aspect, of course, can really um, help you, of course, to stay on track because it's very easy to go out of scope. It's very easy to look at the low-hanging fruit only, of course. But so let's kind of sit down and talk about how we're going to do the planning. So we're going to establish processes to identify the hazards, assess the risks, determine controls, all that good stuff. Got to set goals and objectives. So all this is part of planning too. So it may not seem super sexy and all that, but to sit down and say, this is exactly how we're going to assess our risks. This is exactly how we're going to set goals and objectives and all that. So let's look at what we can do here. So a couple of practical examples then. So there's going to be actions to address the risks and opportunities, of course, objectives, and planning to achieve them. There's a lot of times that you just can't say we're going to have less injuries. You have to have a plan that says we are implementing the following things. And sometimes it's kind of like a building block process. Like you have to have step one done, to step two, to step three, to step four. Others you can work in series and all that kind of stuff then. So planning for changes. So are you changing over products? Are you switching from a more toxic chemical to a less toxic chemical? Are you automating in the workplace and you're going from a lot of hands-on stuff to maybe a production piece of equipment? So you're planning for changes, and of course, when there's changes, there's going to be changes to the hazards in the workplace. So how do you plan on integrating ISO 45001 into your your organizational procedures? So it should be something that you can just really just kind of jive and really get it right into your existing procedures. This should not be a really big, completely different way of thinking and acting out there. We look at the procurement activities then. So this is where we can sit down and say that for the sake of argument, we're gonna buy a piece of production equipment. Well, part of the planning phase before we even buy it is let's look at the manuals. Can somebody get on site? Can we look at all the hazards? What can we have the vendor that we're going to buy it from engineer hazards out, as opposed to us just being stuck with something that we're stuck with? And then it's up to us to figure out what's going to make it safe after that. So procurement can actually play a very big part of really sitting down and addressing hazards up front. And then finally, how do we prepare for emergencies? And then what do we do to respond to these emergencies then? So, and not just when you think about your hazards in the workplace, but we're all kind of getting older at the same time. So what do we kind of plan on for people who drag in some medical issues then? So it has nothing to do with hazards in the workplace, but we love and care about our folks. We got to come up with a plan to address that stuff when it happens at our site. That is it for this episode. Nice and short and sweet on this one. So episode number 77, ISO 45001. Today we talked about the planning aspect and really just how do we sit down and have a plan up front? We just can't kind of start doing stuff and not knowing who's going to do what. who's in charge of what action, what's the estimated time for having something done, or is it that we estimate that we're going to do the top 15 of our hazards in the workplace, and the other ones we're still in the assessing process then? So we have to have a plan in place. We just can't kind of start winging stuff. But episode number 77 is complete. Thank you for joining me. My name is Dr. David Ayers. Thank you and have a safe day.